This is a story of how a land shapes people and how, over many years, a few people in turn come to be the keepers of the land. It is a story of cows and horses and cowboys. Cowboys who were the Indians, of wild and distant windswept lands, of kings and commoners, and people who learned to live with the primal forces of nature. In country unlike anything in the American West, surging surf on beaches of black sand, treacherous lava rock, dense rainforest, vertical cliffs of crumbling rock, and all punctuated by volcanic eruptions and the occasional tidal wave.
Belina mai ne e kipa mai kauhale ne keia manawa ka avale ke roa a mai ne. E ka muolelo. E muolelo kaula no ka paniolo. E no ka muolelo. The story of the paniolo, the Hawaiian cowboy, is all but missing from the history of the American West. It begins 200 years ago, in a time when the word cowboy did not yet exist. A time when young men of Indian and Spanish blood, vaqueros from the great haciendas of Mexican California, made their way to these islands to teach another native people, the Hawaiians, how to ride and round up cattle. So the first cowboys weren't the characters we've grown up with in the movies. In fact, my great-great-grandfather was a vaquero of Mexico. And we knew him only as Hoki Paniolo, Hawaiian for Spanish Jose. So, no laila, hikia o ke launa pume o ko, pekeia mo olero. Apehe hiki mai kapipi, I Hawaii ni mamua. Let us share with you the story of how cattle and the first cowboy came to be.
Over 1,000 years ago, Polynesian voyagers read the stars and waves to find their way to these isolated islands. While British Captain James Cook is credited with the discovery of the Hawaiian Islands in 1778, there is evidence that the Spanish were here 200 years earlier, a link that would reappear and leave enduring marks on life in Hawaii. Ancient chants make reference to Aya Kamakaniu, those with the eyes of the coconut light and green. But the word of Cook's discovery attracted other explorers and traders to Hawaii, eager to add sandalwood to the furs they were trading in China. Inevitably, these outsiders brought gifts, and a few years later, in 1793, British Captain George Vancouver arrived from Monterey, California, with a few Mexican longhorn cattle, and presented them to Hawaii's ruler, King Kamehameha the Great.
According to the custom of the country, we saluted by touching noses. I had on board 5 cows, 2 ewes, and a ram. Such an importation could not fail, being highly beneficial not only to the residents, but to all future visitors.
Some double canoes came off to us in the forenoon, in one of which was the only surviving bull. Kamehameha asked many pertinent questions about the manner of treating them and the advantages likely to be derived from their increase on the island.
Hawaiians call them pua'apepiauhau, pigs with iron ears. Kamehameha placed a kapu or taboo on the killing of cattle, allowing them to multiply and run wild. It was a decision that would influence land use and shape the economy of 19th century Hawaii and its trade with the Americas. For good or evil, imports would change the natural environment drastically. Don Francisco de Paula Marin brought oranges, figs, grapes, roses, and other tropical fruit from Mexico. 10 years later, in 1803, Captain Cleveland brought the first horse. A
The great king, Kamehameha, remarked that he could not perceive that their ability to carry a man quickly from one place to another would be compensation for the great amount of food they would require. One could only hope that time and experience convinced the stolid chieftain of their possible services in the work of civilization.
Along the rugged forested highlands and volcanic shorelines, upland dwellers and Hawaiian riders set out in search of dangerous game.
Wild cattle are numerous in the mountains, so wild and ferocious that the natives are afraid to go near them.
Cattle go wild and are not allowed to be shot without permission from King Kamehameha.
Bulls make great destruction among sugar canes and gardens, breaking into them and tearing them to pieces.
By the time Christian missionaries began arriving around 1820, the legacy of Kamehameha the Great included a surprisingly brisk trade in foreign goods. To support the buying sprees of some of the ruling chiefs, the common people were forced to harvest fragrant sandalwood, carrying logs for miles from the upland rainforest to trading ships at the seashore. As Prime Minister for the boy King Kamehameha III, the royal regent Ka'ahumanu saw that the sandalwood trade was destroying Hawaii's forests as well as her people. She proclaimed the cutting of sandalwood kapu forbidden under penalty of death. But some chiefs had developed insatiable appetites for foreign luxuries. Although there was little sandalwood left to trade, they continued their buying sprees, and their personal debts mounted to about 1.7 million in today's dollars. On May 11, 1826, the first U.S. Navy ship entered Hawaiian waters to enforce the settlement of debts. Payment to the foreign merchants fell upon the commoners in the kingdom. Every adult was obligated to pay in tapamats, Mexican silver, or piculs of sandalwood. With sandalwood all but gone, the answer lay in cattle. Wild longhorns and sheep had multiplied to rather amazing numbers. Many of the rock walls we see today were built by Hawaiians to protect their fields and homes from the devastation of wild cattle. Over the next 40 years, as hundreds of whaling ships poured into the islands for provisions, demand for salt beef, pipikola, soared. Well before most of the American West ever saw a cowpoke or a herd of cattle, Hawaii had become cattle country.
The wall I have my hands upon, it was built in the time of King Kamehameha the Great to retain cattle that were given him as a gift by Captain Vancouver. They were allowed to multiply. Many got out into the upland forests, starting a wild herd. Very wild. They had to be roped by men on horseback. They would be tied to a tree overnight to soften their necks. Then they'd be either led out the next day, or else they would be pinned to an oxen, and the oxen would bring the animal down. These men were cagey people. They were strong, and they were basically fearless. You hear that song, Ho Makau Kaui Kauleili, or Ko Hinapu, or Hikinoa. Hinapu means your horse could go head over heels. They didn't care. That was the type of individual they were. Very brave.
There are immense herds. They employ foreigners to shoot and salt the meat. They first carry all the salt to the mountains. When they have killed the animals, the flesh is cut off their bones, salted, and put in small barrels brought to the shore for the purpose of provisioning.
We found these half-naked foreigners, 2 Europeans killing wild cattle, one a Welshman, the other a Prussian blacksmith.
Our white men are coming to shoot cattle in Waimea. The first man is a blacksmith. He will do the shooting, and the second is a cooper. The cattle I got from the king.
Jacques est le meilleur cavalier de ces îles. Jacques is the best rider in the islands, the most fearless hunter of wild cattle. At 10, he sailed as a cabin boy. At 20, he was shipwrecked on the coast of Hawaii, and there he remained. He's not alone in this kind of existence. There are many like him who hire out their rifles to exploit the wild cattle. À l'exploitation des troupeaux sauvages.
Today, the keepers of Hawaii's Paniolo tradition can still be found in one of the oldest tackles in America, on the sweeping slopes of Mauna Kea.
Adios, adios, que aloha.
days of yore. Being a cowboy, that was pure love. You had to be. Otherwise, that was hard work. That was hard. And, when they were roping those wild cattle, that was hard. We just got to look at it this way, that those were the days of iron men and wooden ships.
Yeah, this I think is about the last saddle house on Park Ranch compared to all the other places. 150 years, I think.
This is really cared for.
Yeah. Today we just come and go. Their days they ride horses. They come and they leave up here. Today, no, as soon as 8 hours or whatever, in Pauhana, you down the road on a car. No, when I came was here. Calvin, yeah. Mahamua. We poured concrete here. I say we saved this because it's one of the last. But you look over there now, it's all pipe. That's the way they want it. But I said, no. We keep the old way. We keep the old way. Twice older than me. I say it like Pitaka. Papa over there is what, over 90? Just one spring chicken. Every day, you know, hey, this thing is very precious. Right. That's how I started. And if I leave or whatever happened with me, hey, that's Paniolo right there.
Right, that thing was there.
Was there, and then you respect.
Right.
Maintain you sweep, clean. Nah.
By 1830, the king and his advisors realized that chasing down wild cattle was not only dangerous, but grossly inefficient. The answer to their problem came from across the sea, from the rich heritage of Mexican California, taught by Franciscan priests on mission ranches, came the vaqueros.
Era una extraña mezcla de razas. He was a strange mixture of races, the blood of caballeros, bullfighters, Jews, Moors, and Indian heroes ran in his veins. If food was short, he fed his horse before he fed his wife. Chilled to the bone, he would ride from dawn to dusk. But there was a sky overhead, wild flowers that spread like a purple carpet, and it chased down the mountainside in the fall, when the air is like wine and life is good.
One of the early sandalwood traders, Captain George Beckley, also had a ranch in Veracruz, Mexico. After arriving in 1806, he became a close advisor to King Kamehameha the Great and married the Hawaiian chiefess Ahia, a woman renowned for her beauty and Spanish dress. Their son, William Malulani, was trained at the Beckley Ranch in Mexico and returned to become Konahiki of Waimea and manager of all the king's cattle. William employed some of the finest Mexican vaqueros, eventually establishing his own ranch in Waimea, which he called Little Mexico. After learning the vaquero trade in Monterrey, 23-year-old Joaquin Armas sailed in 1831 aboard the ship Harriet. When Hawaii's music-loving young king met the ship to hear its two fiddle players, he discovered Armas, a skilled vaquero. Kamehameha persuaded Armas to stay at the royal residence. While nearby 2,000 people labored to build a lava rock wall that would separate Honolulu from cattle roaming the hills beyond. The wall was 6 feet high and 1.5 miles long, stretching across the slopes of Punch Bowl to Makiki, then turning seaward at the mouth of the Manoa Valley. Bullock catchers drove herds of cattle and pigs through the streets of Honolulu to Skinner's Wharf, where rows of slaughterhouses lined the waterfront, and hundreds of ships arrived annually to purchase fresh provisions. But lucrative sales of beef, hides, and tallow still could not keep up with demand for salt beef, pipicola. More vaqueros were needed.
Honolulu, August 19, 1833. I have no cash on hand to pay Captain Henry, but the largest outstanding debt is the amount due me from the king, now about $3,500. Spaniards have been employed about a month in Hawaii, catching bullocks, and thus far have succeeded very well and are now obtaining hides and tallow for the Lima market.
A bright fire was blazing in a cavity in the earthen floor, displaying the dark features of natives gathered around it. group of fine-looking men were all attired in the poncho, an oblong blanket of brilliant colors having a hole in the middle, through which is thrust the wearer's head. The pantaloons are open from the knee downward, with a row of dashing gilt buttons down the seam. A pair of boots, armed with long spurs, completed their costume. They are bullock hunters, just returned from an expedition of 10 days.
Others came from Chile and Peru, some fleeing severe drought, others seeking political asylum, but foreigners who married Hawaiian women after 1840 were required to take an oath of allegiance to the Kingdom of Hawaii. Many were Catholic, a religion that was kapu'o forbidden. Hispanic names became Hawaiian: Juan, Juan, Jose, Joque, Joaquin, Joaquini, Octavio, Octavio.
We got our training from the vaqueros. And many, many years later, almost 50 years later in the American West, the vaqueros taught them how to work cattle too. Hawaiian cowboys are some of the oldest cowboys in the United States. Texas came 50 years after the Hawaiian cowboys. I have some ancestors that come from Mexico, and they were Ramon. They came as vaqueros.
My tutus, they went mostly with wild cattle before because never had brand. And they used to dry the hide after the skin, and then they cut them in strips in 4, 6, or 8, and they start to braid, and they call this kaulili. We preserve our kaulili.
There was no nylon rope, see, and we have to use kaulili.
We translate it in English cow fat, but in Hawaii